can continue to chat in the Slack channel. It will be kept open for further discussions. I will advise you to look into the website that we have. We will post all the materials and video links and everything in there as we collect everything from the lecturers and tutors. So without further delay, I would request Professor Datta to start today's lecture. Over to you, Kushum.
Okay, am I audible and is the slide visible?
Everything.
Yeah. So I have also uploaded these transcripts already in the Slack. So if you cannot see it clearly in the internet, you can open in the Slack and have a look. And anytime you have a question, you can please raise the question then and there. Is my cursor also visible?
Yes, it is.
Okay, fine. So let's see where we are. So this again is the measurement equation where we have written the observed quantity in the left-hand side. And we had this bandpass response of the instrument. And when I write with capital letters, you remember that it has two small v's, one for each antenna. And the antennas are A and B, capital A and capital B. The bandpass response mostly takes care of the frequency response, but it also has a very slow time variation, which we looked at last time and said if we need to, how to take care of it. Then there is a slow part of the gain, and there is a fast part of the gain. This is a gain which doesn't depend on frequency, it only depends on time, and it also doesn't depend on direction. And then you have the integration over the directions in the sky, the direction dependent gain, which we said has a slower time response. You can have an antenna pattern which depends on the two antennas and can also change with time. And you have the sky, you have the propagation kernel, all of these. So this is the equation which you have looked for quite a long time now. And some part of this gain we have already discussed last time, how to take care of them. And you can take care of them without making an image. You can directly take care of them just looking at them in the visibility itself. So what are those? So one is this slower response with time and frequency, which is the bandpass, which is said how to do bandpass calibration. The other is this slower response to time of the receiver gains and some part of the ionosphere, which we said can be taken care of using primary calibration. The rest of it remains. The small time scale variation still remains, which is one of this is this, and the other small time scale variation is the direction dependent part of the gain. Remember, we also said that it so happens that all large time scale variation, if you have any two variation in the gain, one you think of at larger time scale, one you think of at smaller time scale, the variation at the larger time scale will also have larger amplitude. The variation at the smaller time scale will have smaller amplitude. If that was not the case, this calibration process would not have worked. Why? Because when you are taking care of the large time scale variation, we are kind of assuming that the fast time variations are not there. So, okay. So one thing wrong here is that this slow should be fast. So all this fast time scale variation, this should be fast. So let me, probably I'll be able to correct it here. Let me do it. So fast time scale variations, as their amplitudes are small, so if you average over them, they will add up to some noise in the interferometer. And there is a noise term also here, if you remember, which I forgot to write down again. So now we have to look at how to take care of this slow time scale variation, fast time scale variations, the direction dependent gain and the part of the gain that still remains. We also need to look at how to take care of a non-trivial antenna pattern. But let us do these step by step, because at the end you will see that all of these are done together. But to understanding purpose, we need to do them step by step. So let's do that. So I have to figure out how to get rid of this. Okay. Okay. So what is the first problem in our hand? The first problem that we'll tackle is to take care of this first time scale variation of the gain, which doesn't depend on directions. Okay. Why is it still there? Let us ask the question first. Because while doing the primary calibration, okay, so this thing remains in the screen. Fine. So while doing the primary calibration, the calibration is done not at the direction in which my target field is, it's done at a different direction where my calibrator is. Because of that, you remember that there was a part in the ionospheric gain which depends on which direction your antenna is pointing. So that part of the ionospheric gain is different in the direction where you are looking at for the calibrator compared to the direction of your target field. So that is not calibrated out by the primary calibration. Also, if you remember, the primary calibrations are done at different fields. So you actually switch between two fields while doing the calibration. But Arnav was showing you with the data last time. I also have shown you earlier. So you look at the calibrator once at a given time. After that, you move your antenna towards your target field. You look at the target field for preferably longer time. Then you look at the calibrator again, then look at the target field again. You go on this way. So the time at which you are calculating the gain during the observation of the calibrator sources is different than when you are where you are applying the gain to the target field. And this calibrated observations are also done at some 15, 20, 30 minutes interval. So you don't have the gain variation at smaller interval. That's why you cannot calculate the faster time gain variation with the primary calibration observations. So what do we need to do the calibration or to figure out this gain, which is a faster time scale variation? We need to calibrate at the direction of the intended field of view, and we need to calibrate it at a smaller time scale. Okay, somehow we have to figure out how to calibrate at the direction of the intended field of view and how to do it at a smaller time scale. Right. So let's see how to do that. Now remember that whenever you are trying to do a calibration, the calibration essentially means that you need to know something about the source at that direction. I need to have a source model. Any calibration means that I know what is expected, and I observe something, and in between the expectation and observation are the gains. So I observe something and I know what is expected. I can figure out what are the gains. That's the basic of any calibration. So if I look at the measurement equation now, which is much simpler, because I don't have the bandpass calibration, the slow variations. I have only the faster variation of gains, which doesn't depend on which direction you are looking at. Direction dependent part you have not included. So the observed quantity is this direction dependent gain times the visibility and then the noise. And remember, the visibility is essentially the information content of the source. Now, because the gain variation at the smaller time scale is small, much of the calibration is already done. The calibration that you are going to do now, this first variation with the time or the direction dependent calibration, will improve on the previous calibration. Majority of the calibration is already done, which also means that I have a reasonable model whatever I have as this observation, I can consider as a reasonable model for my sky. And once I know the reasonable model for the sky, reasonable model of the visibility for the sky, I can now reconstruct what my sky should be. I can make an image of the sky in principle. We have not learned how to make the image yet, but in principle, I can make an image of the sky. This will not be accurate. It will have much more noise than you expect to have, but still you have a reasonable model of the sky. And the calibration is not so appropriate, but I expect because it's a radio sky, there will be sufficient number of high intensity, high flux point sources in the sky, at least like 10 of them present in the sky. Okay. So what do I have at the end of the previous calibration process is an image of the sky where I can see, say, 10 point sources at 10 different directions. Okay. That's, as I said, I say is a reasonably good model of the sky. You should not consider that as the best thing to have, but you have a reasonably good model of the sky. So now I can write my observed visibilities as this first time scale gains times this reasonably good model of the sky. It's not the true sky, but very close to it. And obviously you have the noise in it. One thing you have to be careful here is that when I do this, again, as I said, that as you go at smaller and smaller time scales, your gain errors decreases, your gains decreases. So what you would like to do is not to go to the smallest time scale possible, which is at the time scale you have recorded the visibilities, which I call say delta t. So like, for example, the data you are looking at probably had delta t equals to 8 seconds. So I'll not look at this quantity at 8-second time intervals, but I will look at this quantity at maybe say 2 minutes time interval, 120 seconds. Why do I need to do that? I want to do that because then, so what I am looking at is initially I was calibrating at say 20 minutes interval. Now I am calibrating at 2 minutes interval, or you can do 5 minutes interval. And once I take care of those gains at 5 minutes interval, my model of the image will improve. So then I can come to 2 minutes interval, then I can come to 1 minute interval, then I can come to 8-second interval. Okay. So what I have done is I have taken the visibilities averaged over a certain amount of time intervals, which I call the solution interval, which I have written with tau sol. And I have an idea for each of these visibilities, how much noise is present. I know the noise per visibility and I have integrated over a certain amount of time, or I have considered tau solutions by delta t visibilities for each t I have written here. So I have some idea about the noise in each of these visibilities. Okay. So what now I do? I essentially try to figure out this GAV at the time scale where I have integrated tau solution using the model of the sky that I am looking at. So that is at the direction of the model at the time of the observation, which is what I required. Because of that, you are like using the model of the sky at the time of the observation, at the direction of the observation to calibrate itself. So this method is called self-calibration. Okay, so let's see what you actually do. So you define a likelihood function. You define the likelihood function in the following way. So for each delta t, which is my observed time sample, like 8 seconds here in the data you are looking at, you define this quantity for each baseline. So if I have a baseline, so I say V observed AV is my observation. I have the model, which is from the initial model of the sky. These are the quantities, which are the gains, which are unknown. I take a mod square of this. So that's called L2 norm. And then I multiply it by a weight. We'll talk about what it is shortly. Now I integrate over or sum over all the timestamps in my solution interval and all the baselines. Okay. And if you remember the previous step, the V observed, I can write as kind of GAB times the model. So this can be simplified with this taking outside, and then there's some chi-NM, chi-AB, sorry, which is this ratio, minus the true gain. Okay, this is like the gain at this stage of the calibration. This is the true gain. If I have estimated the true gain eventually, then obviously the likelihood function will be 0. And that's what you are aiming to do. Remember that when I say this model, that also has a noise part, which I have not written here in the second stage. How do I choose the weight? And again, remember that I said that I have some estimation of the noise in each visibility. So I inverse variance weight. I choose the inverse variance weight, where the weight is 1 by this sigma. So this quantity is kind of, if you remember, is your chi-square. Okay, and there should be a square over here. WAV is 1 by sigma AV square. So this quantity is just like your chi-square. And just like the previous step of the primary calibration, what you try to do is you try to extremize this least square, the likelihood function, for 30 antenna gains. So this GAB is GA and GB, GA star GB. So at that point of time, you try to calculate this 30 GA GB, GA as a function of time, 30 antenna gains. So once you get the gains, then you have the calibration solutions. You have the calibration, you have the gain solutions at the time scale interval of your solution, like what we called tau sol in the previous slide. At that time scale, now I have the gain solution. I can apply that to my data. I'll calibrate at that time scale, just like we are saying, we may start the self-cal procedure with a 5-minute time scale. So any time variation of the gain, which is at 5 minutes and higher, goes away. Then I can redo it for the smaller time scales. So this is roughly the steps that you do. So make an image. It's a deconvolved image from the primary calibration to start with. Calculate those chi-ABs for each solution time. Determines the GABs by the least square minimization, as we discussed. Once you have the GAB at that solution time intervals, you recalibrate using those gains, re-image, and repeat the step 2, 3. Okay. Once you have done it several times in that particular solution time interval, and you know that your image now is not, the noise in the image, if you calculate, is not reducing, you repeat it for smaller time intervals. Okay, and you can imagine that this is very much this self-calibration procedure depends on how good is your sky model. If you don't have a good sky model to start with, this will eventually fail. There are other much more important things of the self-calibration, which I request you to look at and I will not talk about. Like, for example, Poonam talked about something called phase error and phase closer and amplitude closer, which are additional informations which you use for self-calibration. If you are familiar with a minimization, likelihood minimization technique, which is written over here, if you are familiar with the likelihood minimization technique, which is a little bit advanced likelihood minimization technique, where in addition to this, you may have constraints. And you can add those constraints using what are called the Lagrange undetermined multipliers. And those phase closures are the constraints that one uses as Lagrange undetermined multiplier with this likelihood function, amplitude closures when you are trying to calibrate the amplitude. But those are details which we'll probably not have time to discuss in this set of lectures. Okay, so this is the basics of self-calibration. So let me stop here now and ask you if you have anything to ask me. So any questions so far? I guess that the participants are allowed to unmute themselves. And I guess I am audible.
Yes, both the answers are yes.
So any questions so far on self-calibration? Yeah, you don't need to raise your hand. You can directly ask question. Aman.
Yes, sir. Just a second. What I was asking. Yes, sir. Sir, if we calculate individual gains from each of the antennas and take an average, so this gain would be how much it would be close to the true gain?
So where are you? You are not taking average over individual gains, right?
Yes, sir.
See what you are doing here. Maybe you are
Sir,
confused.
this is fine. Yes, sir. I understood everything, but what I'm saying, you just calculating true gain with this likelihood function, right? For each of the antennas.
Right.
Right. So after this calculation, if we take an average of this, all of these gains over 30 antennas.
No, you don't take an average of all of these gains over 30 antennas. So let me tell you a little bit more in more detail what we are doing here. Okay, so then probably it will be clear. So if you look at this likelihood function, let's ask the question, what does it depend on? What are the unknowns? Okay. So in the right hand side, WAV is known. So that's the noise or variance, right? This is also known. And for the time being, we can assume that the model is also known. Okay, that's the assumption that you are making. If you have some error in the model, which we have, then obviously your estimates will not be as good. But all of these are known at a given time. What are not known at that given time, I do not know the gains of individual antennas, which are sitting over here, right? Now, if I ask the question, what the likelihood function a function of, it's a function of the gains of these individual antennas. Is that clear? And that function is complicated because for each baselines, you have pair of antennas coming in. So that function is complicated. It's a quadratic complicated function, but the likelihood function is a function of this n antennas, the gain of n antennas at that given time. Is that fine?
But after all this, we calculating this true gain by minimizing, right?
No, we will come to that. But is it fine that the likelihood function is a function of this? So say if I have 3 antennas and I'm only looking at the phase, so it's a function of 3 numbers, right? And these 3 numbers are unknown because we do not know the gain. So what I do is I find the minima of this function, the likelihood function, for these 3 numbers. But why I find the minima? Because I know that if I have achieved the true gain, then chi equals to g, then the likelihood function is 0. So obviously it will not be 0 because you have noise and your model is not correct, but it is supposed to be at the minimum. So I asked the question, what is the value of the gains at the minimum of the likelihood function? That is the best estimate of the gain I can have at that stage. Okay, does that clear your doubt?
Yes, sir. In this way, we can have individual gains, right?
Right.
But if we are considering these all gains will be different, right? So there is also some spread between these gains.
Can you speak a little louder?
What I'm saying, these all gains will be slightly different from each other, and we can also calculate statistics of all these individual gains, right?
Right.
Like average of all these gains and also standard deviation.
Right, right.
So is that statistics important here?
Yes, it's obviously it is important. See what you have. This is the quantity that you are trying to estimate, right? If I can estimate this quantity absolutely, then I can take care of that. I can divide V obs by this quantity and I will get the true visibilities, right? Now, as you are saying that I can only estimate this quantity. When I say I can only estimate means I will give you the best value of the estimate. I will give you certain uncertainty in the estimate. Okay. The calibration procedure gives you both of these. So you know that how much good is the estimate of your gain. You know that the mean value of the gain. So you take care of the mean value of the gain, and then you say that, okay, my data is calibrated at 1% level. Fine. And then you try to minimize that 1%, obviously.
Yes.
Okay. So let's proceed. If anybody else has any other question right now. Okay, so let's proceed. So what do we know? So we know now to calibrate at smaller time scales. We have not determined how to do the direction dependent calibration yet. Now, if I am looking at an observation which is at rather higher frequencies, you know, the field of view is lower at higher frequency, because remember the field of view depends on lambda but divided by d. So higher frequency means lower lambda. So the field of view is lower. If the field of view is lower, most of the direction dependent gains is coming because of the ionosphere. Ionosphere may not have changed much across your field of view, so it may not be important. So higher frequency, you may not need to do direction dependent calibration. Even in L band, most of the time people do observation. They don't do direction dependent calibration. Okay, so that one has to remember. But for the case of UR type observation or even post UR observation, it's very important. And I think Arnav will show you the effect of that doing direction dependent calibration and not doing the direction dependent calibration. What the direction dependent calibration essentially gives you, what is the effect of not calibrating along different direction, is like what you call seeing in optical astronomy. If you look at a star in the sky at night, you'll see the star is twinkling, right? The exact same effect you get if you don't do direction dependent calibration at low frequencies. So let's try to guess or try to get to how to do direction dependent calibration. And for this, again, we will see that only the nuisance term in our entire measurement is the direction dependent calibrations, direction dependent gains, which are these small d terms. It depends on which antenna, on top of which antenna the ionosphere is, which direction it is, and it can obviously gain, so depends on time. Okay. So how to calibrate for these quantities? Now, when you calibrate for these quantities, in practice, you actually do direction dependent calibration and self calibration in random, in tandem, means you do one after the other, you do them together. not like you do first self-calibration and then do direction-dependent calibration. Mostly you don't do that. But so that we'll speak about when we'll see the strategy of doing direction-dependent calibration. For pedagogical purposes, learning purposes, we always learn everything separately so that it's easier to understand. So let's say that we have only the direction-dependent gains. Now imagine that in my entire sky, in the target field of observation, I have only one point source, which is not at the phase center, but somewhere else at N1, say. And we saw that what the visibilities should be for such a point source. This point source will represent as I0, which is the flux of the source, into a delta function, peaking at the point of the source. And let's also imagine that we know the antenna beam pattern. So A as a function of n cap is also known, which is not a very bad assumption because the observatories are supposed to tell you what is A as a function of n cap. That's a part of the instrument which, when you are going to observe, somebody has to tell you what is your instrument response. So it's a part of the instrument response which one has to tell you. So you already know that. Okay. So this is the I that I will put in for the I over here, and I have a delta function integration over n cap. What all it will do is change every n to an n1, right? So that's what I show you here now. So every n has changed to n1, and I have the I0 obviously. So if I have a point source which is not at the phase center, a little bit far away, and I get to observe the visibilities or get to observe this quantity for that point source. That's what I measure with my interferometer. I know about the source. Then let's see in the right hand side, what are the terms that I know? I know what is I0 because I know the source. I know the antenna beam, so I know this. I know this term as well because I know where my antennas are, so I know the baseline and I know the direction of the source. What I don't know are the two direction dependent terms, and you can now see that doing this observation, now I can figure out what are these direction dependent terms. In fact, if I even had the G, AB, GXT sitting outside, remember that in my actual expression, I have both this first term and the direction dependent term. Even if it was sitting outside, you can imagine what will happen here. Instead of just getting the small d A and small dB, I will get GADA and GADB. So that's why I was saying that you do self-calibration and this calibration together, because the entire gain you can now figure out. And you exactly follow the self-calibration loop after that. Okay, remember in the self-calibration, so what is the self-calibration loop? So here this I0 AN cap into the N1 cap UAB, this entire thing you can treat as your model visibility. And then you have to just do the self-calibration at that direction. And that is the all idea, the physical idea of the direction dependent calibration. So let me ask at this point, if the idea is clear, then obviously when you are looking at your target field, you will not have only a single source at somewhere sitting not at the phase center. You will have a more complicated structure of the source in the sky. How do you apply this idea to that, to actually do the calibration? That we will talk about. But if the idea is clear, please let me know at this stage. If there is any doubt, let me put the full screen here. If there is any doubt, please let me know at this stage. All right. So let's see that how to implement this idea in actual calibration procedure. So that's what I have written down here as the steps for direction dependent calibration. So you do the primary calibration, make an image, do maybe a few rounds of self calibration as well, because you see that the direction dependent gains vary at a much lesser time scale, smaller time scale than 20 minutes over which you do the primary calibration. So so maybe the direction dependent gains are varying at say 3-minute time scale. So from 20 minutes primary calibration image, I can do a 10-minute self calibration. I can do a 5-minute self calibration. Then when I have to do a 2-minute self calibration, then I should be looking at the direction dependent calibration as well. That's the idea. Also, the ionosphere doesn't vary like in 1 millisecond times, 1 millisecond or 1 second direction difference in the sky. It rather varies much smoothly. So when I say that I need a point source at the direction of n1 to calculate this gain at the direction n1. Now, if I want to make an image, the image, each pixel in the image corresponds to different directions. So which essentially means if I want to follow this method, then I need one point source at each image point, each image pixel to calibrate the direction dependent gain at that direction. Now that obviously then that essentially means that for each pixel in the image, you know what the intensity is, which means that you already know the image, which means that you have already done the calibration. So that is not possible, right? You can only, your sky is not full of point source at each pixel, but there will be very strong point source. Maybe there are 10 of them at different directions in your field. Okay. So the idea is that because the ionosphere doesn't vary much, if I now estimate the direction dependent gains at these 10 different directions in the sky, random directions, I can interpolate them in all my pixels, and that will be good enough. Okay. If you look at carefully, what you are trying to do now is to get a gain solution for each antenna at each time, at each direction in the sky. What I am telling you is that the direction dependence is much less. So I don't need to really know about each direction in the sky, but a few directions and then interpolation will work. So I make a self-calibration image. And now what I do is I have a model of the sky. I choose one strong point source out of the phase center. I keep the model of that point source, and I subtract everything else in the sky. How do I subtract? Well, I know the visibility of the sky, which means I know the visibility of each of these 10 point sources, which means that I know where the point source is and what is the intensity of the source. So I can now estimate what my observed visibilities will be for each of these point sources and subtract them out from my observation. What I will be left with is the visibility, which is supposed to be coming from only one point source, which is not at that phase center, which is a little bit away from the phase center. Now for this point source, which is now say at n1 cap, you calculate the direction dependent gains. Okay. Once you calculate the direction dependent gains, you apply that to your entire visibilities, all the visibilities, non-subtracted visibilities. So you have calibrated now for the direction dependent gain at that direction. Now you do a round of self-cal and re-image, repeat the exercise for another point source which is not at the phase center. So what you are doing essentially is one by one, you are taking care of the effect of the direction dependent gain in your visibility coming from different directions. Okay, so that's why sometimes this process is also called peeling, taking out the effect one by one. Now, in principle, you see there the direction dependent gains depends on the directions. So the gain in one direction is independent of the gain in the other direction, which means in principle, I can parallelize this process. I can try to solve for the solutions for the direction of all 10 point sources. Okay, but it turns out that it is being implemented, and probably Arnav will, when he shows, he will tell you about the package where it is implemented. I have myself never done direction dependent calibration because I have not made a single image which is not at 1420 near to 1420 megahertz. So Arnav is the expert who has actually done direction dependent calibration and will tell you. But this is the idea, and it turns out that you can parallelize it, but it doesn't help you much. It requires a lot of memory resource as opposed to CPU resources. Like if you want to do it for one source at a time, you need a lot of your CPU time increases, the time the program runs increases, but you need less memory. If you want to parallelize it, you are doing the same exact exercise for all different directions, which means now you need n times more memories if you are doing for n directions. Your CPU time may reduce. Okay, so that there are caveats in this. So that is about the direction dependent calibration. So if you have again any question at this stage, please ask, otherwise we'll proceed. Okay, so seems you don't have any question or you don't want to ask, so let's proceed. So we have been talking about different calibration procedures, and while doing the different calibration procedures, at least the last two, which direction dependent calibration you must have understood already, is also a self calibration, because you are using the information at the direction of the source itself to calibrate the source. So that's essentially a self calibration, calibrating itself. So we need to make images for this calibration, but let us still take a step back and ask the following questions. So I've written this as question answer dialogue here because we are not asking questions, so I should ask myself. So why are we learning radio data analysis? The answer is that redshifted 21 centimeter signal is at radio frequency. So we want to observe redshifted 21 centimeter signal. So that's why we are learning radio data analysis. Then the next question is, what property of this 21 centimeter redshifted signal, H1 signal, we want to measure? Well, we want to measure, we said that Somnath in the first set of lecture described to you, it's very difficult to actually make an image of the sky because the radiation coming from redshift of 6 or redshift of 7 is so feeble that you cannot make an image at different directions in the sky. So what you do is you do intensity mapping, which is measuring the power spectrum of the sky of the H1 emission, redshifted 21 centimeter emission, which tells you how much emission is there, how much emission is there at different length scales or angular scales in the sky, which in turn tells you how much density of H1 is there at different angular scale in the sky, which in turn tells you how much ionization has happened at different angular scale in the sky, and that's where you are learning the ionization, right? So the quantifier of this different scale informations of the fluctuation of the H1 21 centimeter emission is called the power spectrum, and how the density fluctuation of H1 is related, the power spectrum of the density fluctuation of H1 is related to the observables from a radio interferometry observation was also talked to you about in the last lecture by Somnath. His last 5th lecture or 4th lecture, he showed it to you. What you measure as a proxy for the power spectrum of the H1 fluctuations is what we call the visibility correlation, which is essentially this quantity. So it's V star. V, you can do it at the same baseline or at different same frequency or at different frequencies. Preferably do at same baseline, at least theoretically. You will see that you actually do not do at the same baseline. So that Shamir will talk to you about. But this is a quantity that you want to measure. And there is an ensemble average, which again, we'll see that what that is on. But that is the quantity that you want to measure. Is the quantity which is correlating the visibilities. Why bother making an image? Visibilities after calibration, the visibilities is the thing that you get from the sky. You don't need to make an image. So that's the next question. Oh, power spectrum depends on the visibilities directly. Why would we bother to learn imaging, which is the next topic that we want to learn, which will be in the next lecture. But let's ask the question, why bother to learn imaging? First of all, one reason you have already seen that the small time scale variations and the direction dependent calibration requires you to make an image. You need a model of the sky, which is essentially an image. So it's required that you make an image for those. Also, it is not only the 21 centimeter signal that we receive while observing the 21 centimeter signal, we also get the foregrounds. So that is a huge nuisance for these type of observations. And let's talk about that a little bit. This is not a dedicated discussion on foreground, which will be completely different than what I am aiming here. But let's still talk about the foregrounds because it has something to do with the calibration as well. So all that we receive as visibilities are not part of 21 centimeter signal. It's also that they do not come from a certain distance r from a given hemisphere in the sky. Remember that when we are deriving the Vansittart-Janicki theorem, we assume that all the radiation originates from a hemisphere of radius r. And when it comes up to the ionosphere, nothing happens to it. Nothing gets added up, nothing gets reduced. That's not quite true. The radiation that you receive originates at different r. Okay. But interestingly, if you remember the Vansittart-Janicki theorem, the visibilities have absolutely no dependence on r as long as r is very large. R is very large compared to the antenna spacing. Well, r is always very large compared to the antenna spacing because the nearest radiation that we will receive will be still few kiloparsecs away. Antenna spacings are only few 100 kilometers, if you wish, the maximum. So the Vansittart-Janicki theorem, where the intensity comes as a function of the direction in the sky, really doesn't have any r dependence. So all the radiation that is coming from one direction in the sky can be added up, and that will have the H1 radiation and the foreground for our case. The foregrounds for this type of observations has physically and also operationally two different types of sources. One are the extragalactic compact sources. So these are essentially radiation coming from AGNs and things related to AGNs in external galaxies. They're either not resolved, so they're point sources, or they're compact, means the entire radiation occupies only a very small region in the field of view. Okay, so these can be imaged very well. As we'll see that compact sources can be imaged rather easily. So these are compact sources, so I have written FC. But then there are radiation coming from the diffuse synchrotron radiation from our galaxy, and it's coming from all directions, so it's a diffuse radiation. So it's not compact, it will come from each and every pixel in your image. And it turns out that this cannot be imaged quite well. So these are the foregrounds. And the bad thing is, the bad news is that these foregrounds are 10 to the 3 to 10 to the 4 times stronger. The visibilities are 10 to the 3 to 10 to the 4 times stronger than the H1 signal. What does it mean? It means that you are asked to measure the distance from, say, I am in Varanasi to, say, NCRA, which is in Pune, which is maybe approximately 2000 kilometers away. So you're asked to, sorry, not 2000, yeah, it's around 2000 kilometers away. So you're asked to measure the distance from Varanasi to Pune, 2000 kilometers away, at an accuracy of 1 millimeter. And 2000 kilometers you can measure with an accuracy of few kilometers very well, even with a satellite. If I ask you to measure with a millimeter, all hairs will break loose. So it will almost not be possible. So that type of measurements are called high dynamic range measurements, and that requires high dynamic range calibrations of our instruments. What is a dynamic range? A dynamic range is defined to be the ratio of the maximum that you want to measure to the noise in your image. So if I want to measure a 1 Jansky signal and the noise in my image is 1 microjansky, then my dynamic range is 10 to the 6. Here you can see that it is a problem of the dynamic range limitations. Your foregrounds are 10 to the 4 times the H1 signal. Actually, in the H1 signal, you want to go much deeper to get a power spectrum. Sorry, to get a power spectrum. So it's a like you want to make, if you want to make an image, your image has to be of dynamic range 10 to the 5 to 10 to the 7. That's an extremely difficult problem because of the following reason. So this is a sketch of why the problem comes. Observed visibility now, I can write as the H1, visibility that is coming because of H1, and the visibility that is coming because of the foreground. And say you have done the calibration. If I have done the calibration, then the gain is all 1, right? That's the meaning of calibration. But because the calibration is not absolutely accurate, there is a little bit of uncalibrated gain, which I call delta. Okay, and for most of the observations that people do other than this type of things, other than what we are discussing here, if your delta is 10 to the minus 3, which is 0.1%, you will be dancing. You are always very pleased and publish a paper if your delta is like 5%. Okay. Now let's see what delta has to be for our case. Obviously, I have to subtract the foreground to be able to see the signal. So what I do is I subtract the foreground from the observation. So you'll see what I will be left with is VH1 times delta, which must be much smaller than VH1 because delta is 10 to the minus 3. So I can forget that. I will be left with VH1 itself. I'll be left with VF times delta. Now VF is 10 to the 3, 10 to the 4 times. If delta is 10 to the minus 3, this can be as big as VH1. So you now realize why you need to do a very high dynamic range calibration. Okay. Now there is one effect that we have not talked about and which adds to this dynamic range effect very drastically. So let me talk about that and end this lecture, which is the effect of the bad antenna beam pattern. I say bad because if I look at any particular antenna gain pattern, which is the gain which multiplying the electric field, not the intensity gain, that will have a part which doesn't depend on time. If your antenna is completely azimuthally symmetric, if your antenna gain is azimuthally symmetric, antenna beam is azimuthally symmetric, then it will not depend on time. I will tell you why. So that is this part. If your antenna is not azimuthally symmetric, then what happens is the following. If you assume the antenna in the sky, so if I assume, okay, for some example, anyway, so if I assume the antenna in the sky which is not symmetric, as your source moves in the sky from rise to set, the antenna beam actually rotates in the sky. This is because of a particular type of mounting system of the telescope that one uses, called an altazimuth mounting system. So antenna beam rotates and it is not symmetric, which means now it will have time dependence, right? At a given direction in the sky, in your field of view, your gain will change its time. And that is this part that I have added here. Now that, if I now put in to my observed visibilities, this thing when I square it will give the antenna, the regular antenna beam pattern. And then I will have this excess term. Now this is exactly the 1 plus delta term that we were talking about earlier in more detail. You see that this A, so you have written, basically you have written down that delta in terms of the amplitude contribution and the phase contribution. And all of these quantities are rather small, obviously. So I have neglected small a times small a terms, but still I will be left with this. And this excess beam is essentially like 1 plus delta that we are talking about. And this will give rise to the dynamic range calibration problem. Okay. Now, fortunately, there is already existed an algorithm where this can be calibrated out. If I know this term well, so if I know this term to certain accuracy, what this is doing is that, see, this entire thing is a function of n cap and time. So I can think of, so there is an integration over n cap. So I can think of this as a multiplication of the rest of the term, which will give you the visibilities, the sky visibilities. So this is essentially, if I go to the visibility domain, which is a function of u, this will give you a convolution of the excess beam pattern, Fourier transform of the excess beam pattern with the true visibilities. And one have an algorithm, if you know that excess visibility, excess antenna beam pattern term, one has an algorithm to calibrate that out or to take that out as a function of time. It's called the A projection algorithm, A for antenna. So I'll stop there. Again, if you have any question, obviously you should ask. And we'll discuss caveats of imaging in the next lecture. Yeah, any question?
questions in the chat box or any raise hands. So
So I will unshare.
Hello.